Good evening, everybody, and welcome to webinar 29, Adult Learning Theory in Social Work. Today, myself and David will be speaking to
Hi,
me in the chat. Tell us where in the world you are. Are you a social worker? Are you a student? Are you in a related field? And I'm just going to have a quick look at the chat and see what you're all putting.
Yeah, let's see how far across the globe we've got tonight.
Yeah, at the moment we are UK-wide, that's right, isn't it? UK-wide?
Yeah, Coventry, yeah, so yeah.
Coventry, that's, you must be close to Die, so that's not too far at the moment. Let's see when we go global. Let's have a look.
We've got Halton.
That's in the UK, Dave. That's not. It is a long way from Scotland. I will give you that.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent! Look at that. Look at that now. London. Yeah. I just love reading the chat and seeing like how many different social workers we've got on. If you are a social worker, what type are you? Put that in.
I quite like just seeing the different UK names, I'll be honest. Like Epping is such a cool name. And then like the difference, you go from Epping in England up to Auchtermuchty in Scotland. I mean, so.
Australia, previously the UK. Wow. Australia's quite big, isn't it?
Protection in Australia as well.
Yeah.
Zimbabwe.
Another hospital discharge, child protection. Zimbabwe,
yeah.
Excellent. It's like Zimbabwe, straight back to Croydon, straight to Hull, straight to Gibraltar. Northern Ireland, Burnley. Excellent. Another one from Scotland, Dave. You see that?
Yeah, I've seen a few now. There's one from Falkirk in here as well tonight. North Scotland, Claire. Where do you mean North Scotland, Claire? It's quite a big place. Curious.
Like I'm from Manchester originally, and I think that's north. But Britain, Manchester, not north compared to where you are.
Murray is definitely very north. Yeah.
About 3 minutes past, and we've got 300 and something people in the room. The chat is slowing down, so I think, are we ready to start, do we think?
Well, there's Venezuela,
Pakistan. Oh, South Wales Valleys.
Oh, sorry, no, they're from Guyana, bordering Venezuela. My apologies.
Okay, yeah, I think we're probably ready to start because the chat has slowed down and the numbers are pretty steady at the moment. So yep. Shall we start with the next slide, Siobhan, and I'll pass over to you. So we just wanted to mention today that it is Holocaust Memorial Day. I'm sure you will have seen a lot about this on social media. So today, this year, the theme is the light in the darkness. And I just want us to bear in mind really that as social workers or social work students, we often are the light in the darkness. And just to think about what that means going forward for our profession. And we will be coming back to this in a future webinar, but I just wanted us to bear that in mind.
Okay. Thanks, Kelly. I think that is a really important day for us to remember and think about, as you say, in our role as social workers. So thank you. And oh gosh, we've dashed up again to 350 people. It's fabulous to see so many people from all over the world joining us tonight. We do know tonight that there are going to be, I think, probably quite a lot of students and quite a lot of practice educators joining us, because tonight we're going to be looking at adult learning theory. But actually adult learning theory, it relates to every one of us as social workers, whatever role we're in. Adult learning theory is a really important aspect for us to think about. And I think if we get time later, Nicola might share with us why it's been important for her in her practice just recently. But tonight we'll be looking at adult learning theory. As you know, if you've been to our webinars before, then we try to bring in some theory, some practice and some experience. So it's about bringing the whole thing together. If you're here for the first time tonight, then you are very welcome. Do use the chat to chat about what's happening here. We've got a team of 10 fabulous students and newly qualified social workers who'll be joining in the chat and engaging with you as we go along. In terms of looking at adult learning theory, it's not just for practice educators and students, it is for everybody. An understanding of adult learning theory is vital for helping people to create change, for supporting growth, for human development and an understanding of that. So it is important for all of us, but we will be talking about placements. We'll be talking about the first year in practice. So in England, that would be ASYE. In different parts of the UK and different parts of the world, the transition to becoming a social worker can be different, but actually understanding adult learning theory is important for all of us. We've been joined tonight by a special guest, Andrew, who I think is just going to introduce himself at this point. If you put your microphone on and say hello, Andrew.
It is on. Yes, hello everyone. Yeah, Andrew Gambrill from Warwickshire County Council, practice educator for about 10 years, I think. Oh, that's what it says on the bio, doesn't it? So, but yeah, really excited to be part of this tonight, and looking forward to interacting with everybody.
Okay, fabulous. Thanks, Andrew. So tonight, as I said, we're going to be looking at adult learning theory, but throughout all of our webinars, we try and make sure that we've made clear the framework that we use as social workers. So looking at how an approach flavours everything that we do, how a theory is about our understanding, a model is about our intervention, and a method is a specific tool or technique in practice. Now, we talk about this a lot, so I'm not going to go into any detail on it because we talk about it in such a lot. But if you wanted to revisit that, previous webinars, we've explored it in more detail. But we're going to try and talk about adult learning theory as it relates into approaches that we might take, models that we might use in our practice, but we will be focusing on the theory side tonight. But I suppose before we start looking at the theory, just a couple of slides thinking about approaches to adult learning. And what we've got on this slide is the kind of image is supposed to show that teaching and learning are basically different sides of the same coin. And in terms of approaches, as a practice educator, I've been a practice educator now for 27 years. As a practice educator, I might take a particular approach to the way in which I work with students. But I equally know that some students take particular approaches to the way they go about their learning. So just before we start to look at the learning theory, I just want to go through a few approaches just to be clear about where we're coming from. What I want you to think about as I'm talking this through is these approaches could relate to you if you're helping somebody to learn, or they might relate to you in terms of your own learning. So the approaches I'm going to quickly go through are most of what we think about in terms of the adult learning theory that we draw on in social work comes either from a behaviourist approach or from a humanist approach. So we'll have a quick look at those, but then we want to look a bit more. I'm going to drill into a bit more detail into surface and deeper learning approaches, and I'm going to ask all of you to think about your own approach there, and then we'll also just quickly refer to Honey and Mumford's approaches to learning. So what I've tried to do here is there's sort of two approaches here that will work if you are facilitating learning, and there's two approaches here if you are a learner in whatever way. So in terms of a behaviourist approach, this is really all based on the idea that learners respond to external factors, so that a learner learns because they get a certificate, or a learner learns because they're given feedback. It's like a stimulus that is required to prompt their learning, and it's based around things like, you know, Skinner's rats and Pavlov's dogs and all of those things about we do something because of the reaction that we get because of an external factor. So in many ways, the two different approaches, the behaviourist approach and the humanist approach, are really about whether we look to external or internal factors in many ways. The two main theories that we use as social workers that we draw out of the behaviourist approach are social learning theory and situated learning theory. So we're going to look at situated learning theory later on tonight and drilling into the specific theories. But just as a bit of an introduction, a behaviourist approach is used quite commonly in social work and learning. Then we've got a humanist approach. Now, a humanist approach comes out of the work of Carl Rogers. It's sometimes we talk about a humanist approach as facilitative learning. It's almost on the opposite side of a behaviourist approach. So a behaviourist approach sees learning as being part of external rewards. So we learn something because of something that we get, because of an external factor. Whereas a humanist approach is based on the belief that people want to learn, that people have a kind of just intrinsic desire to learn something, that people feel that they get some kind of just a warm feeling inside, a glow, because they've learned, and that's what humanism would look at. And I suppose a theory that we might use that's drawn out of a humanist approach would be something like andragogy, which is a big fancy word, but is really a theory around how adults learn. So we've got these two main approaches. Now, most practice educators will actually draw on a bit of both, really, a bit of recognizing that there's some elements of the environment that matter for a learner, but there's some elements of what's going on internal for the learner. I think most people, as we do in a lot of social work, we take bits from everywhere. And I think we take bits of a humanist approach, bits of a behaviorist approach. And whilst I've said, you know, there's a particular theory here that's drawn out of this approach, we also have to recognize that some theories do draw on lots of different elements. So tonight, for example, we're going to look at the theory of learning styles, and that draws a bit out of a humanist approach, a bit out of a behaviorist approach, but it also draws a bit from a cognitive approach. So there's lots of different theories that we're going to draw on tonight. But they're the two main approaches to the way we help people to learn, or to the way in which we understand learning. Is it about the environment, or is it about the individual? They're the two kind of stances, if you like. But then in terms of your own learning, so looking at how you learn, what about approaches that you take to learning? So here, think of all of us, you know, I'm a practice educator, I facilitate learning, I deliver training a lot. So for me, I suppose my whole role is all about helping other people to learn, but I can also think about how do I learn. So the next couple of slides, I'm going to ask you to think about how you learn, your own learning as an individual. So Honey and Mumford are very well known for talking about learning styles, which we're going to look at a little bit later. But they also wrote about 4 different approaches to learning. And these are the 4 approaches. I want you to see if you can identify which approach you take, and then I'll tell you which approach is really promoted within social work training in many ways. So first of all, we've got intuitive learners. Now, Honey and Mumford said intuitive learners are a kind of, they're the person who thinks they learn through a sort of process of osmosis. They're just like, oh, I'm a sponge and I soak it all up. Have you ever heard anyone say that? That's kind of like the intuitive learners. We just think that we're learning from everything that goes on around us. It just happens by a kind of process of osmosis. But if you try and challenge the learner and think about how are you learning, they'll refer to a whole variety of experiences that they've had, but they can't really talk about what they've learned in any detail or how they've learned it. They're the kind of people who'll say, oh, I've been to the University of Life, I have. That kind of, they can't really articulate what they've learned and how they've learned it. It's all just, oh, I've learned from experience. That's intuitive learners. Then you can have an incidental learning approach. So an incidental learner is someone who learns from chance, really. Something's happened and they've got to learn from it. So I don't know, I think of it, you know, if you've been to these webinars before, I'm a very visual thinker. I think of an intuitive learner as a sponge, just soaking it all up. I think of an incidental learner as somebody who walks into a lamppost and then starts to learn about don't walk into a lamppost. It's something happens to you and then you learn from it. But it's almost like something bad's got to happen or something significant's got to happen, or else you won't learn. You'll just go through life. If everything's smooth, you're not going to learn. You learn from mistakes, or you learn from something very significant happening. Then you've got a retrospective approach. Now, a retrospective learner is similar to an incidental learner. They look back at what's happened when something's happened, and that's how they learn. So they almost like reflect back on what's happened in the past, and that's how they learn from it. I think differently to the incidental learner, then a retrospective learner can learn from routine things, can learn from things that have gone well. It doesn't have to be bumping into a lamppost. It doesn't have to be something's gone badly wrong before they learn. They will just learn from routine things, but they'll only learn by looking back at something. And then your other learner is a prospective learner. Now, a prospective learner, in a way, it's almost like this is the proactive person. This is the person that plans for it. This is the person who thinks, I really need to learn such and such a thing, so I'm going to set out to do this, and then I'll learn from it. So they seek out experiences that will help them to learn. Now, if you think about everything we do as social workers, it calls for a prospective approach to learning. If you go on a placement as a student, you're asked, what are your learning needs? The first thing you're asked is, what do you need to learn? The beginning of your first year in practice, you're asked, what are your learning needs? Think about anything that we do. It calls for us to take that proactive approach, to think about what we need to learn. The CPD records that we need to keep for our regulators, they all ask us, what do you need to learn? How are you going to learn it? So these are those different approaches, just to kind of get you thinking, which of those approaches do you take? Which of those approaches is your natural approach, if you like? But what I really want you to do is to explore for yourself and to be honest. I mean, you can put it in the chat, but be honest with yourself. Don't kid yourself here, because there's only you that you're kidding. Do you take a surface approach to learning or a deeper approach to learning? And this really matters. And the illustration I've put there is, you know, the surface approaches, they just paddle in the sea. Whereas the deeper approach, they're really digging down. They want to go deep down and have a good look. As someone who takes a surface approach is kind of just learning something for learning's sake. In a way, that's your sort of criticism of behaviorist approach, of just thinking about if you're giving somebody a reward. You know, Skinner's rats just learned to get the food, or Pavlov's dogs just learned to get that extrinsic, external reward. So I suppose you might think of something like, I don't know, I'm showing my age a bit now, but I've got a French O-level. That's what we had in those days. I've got French O-level. I cannot speak French. I just learned to get through the exam. That's what I did. I just learned what to say. I learned how to say, hello, my name's Siobhan, I'm 16 years old, so that I could get through a French O-level. I took a very surface approach. The day after, I wasn't speaking French. You know, that's a surface approach. Whereas to something like social work, I think I've always taken a deeper approach, because I'm really interested in it and I want to know about it and I want to explore it. And someone tells me about something and I want to find out more, and I'll go away and I'll research it and I'll look at it for myself. That is a deeper approach. Now you need to think about, what kind of approach are you taking? As a practice educator, if I work with a student, I'm always really, keen when they bring things and they say, let's explore this, let's think about that. I've been thinking this. What they're doing is they're demonstrating to me that they're taking a deeper and a proactive approach to their learning. And that's what we're really looking for, that deeper approach. But I wanted to finish looking at approaches by using the surface and deep approach to show that this is how both teaching and learning come together as two sides of the same coin. Because I hear a lot of academics and practice educators, for example, talking about learners by saying, oh, they're just a surface learner. You hear that being used, or oh, they're a surface learner. But I think it's not the learner that we should be saying is surface or deeper. It's actually about the learning opportunities that we give to people and the opportunities to learn. So I love this quotation, which is actually taken from engineering, nothing at all to do with social work, but for me really illustrates it. And Horton says, we shouldn't identify the student with a fixed approach to learning. It's the design of the learning opportunity that encourages students to adopt a particular approach. Very crudely, deep is good and surface is bad. And what we need to do is teach in a way that encourages students to take a deeper approach to their learning. So I know tonight we've got quite a few people joining us who are new practice educators. What I'd say to you is think about how can you encourage a student to take a deeper approach, particularly with new ways of working when people are working from home. But Andrew, I think this is something that, you know, you do a lot of work with newly qualified workers, don't you? That's the main part of your role in lots of ways. So
yep.
Can you see the difference between surface and deeper learners when you're working with social workers?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the first things you notice is absolutely an approach regarding when the surface ones, they're looking at the processes and the procedures, and I totally get that, because it's you know, that throughput and the anxiety that, you know, and it's tangible. I can see this caseload getting the throughput and that, you know, learning those, and it's important. It is important, but it's not the key part of learning. For the deep learners, they're focusing on the service user, on their family, on the situation that they're in, and understanding that, and really kind of taking time themselves to talk, think about it, talking with their peers, talking with their practice educators, or talking with their managers, and that's literally the approach, because it can be. As I say, the anxiety of getting a good throughput and appearing to be productive, and kind of setting yourself up amongst your new peers to be, she's good, she's getting through the caseload, but actually, particularly at this stage, and I think it's about being comfortable with where you are on your learning journey, and being where you're at. This is where I'm at, and I need to ask the whys all the time, and so it's just being okay and being comfortable with maybe taking your time, taking longer than everybody else around with, because you should be, and of course you would be, because of where you are, but trying to really understand, including social policy, the sociology, and as well as just the presenting problems.
I think that's really interesting. I love the fact that you said asking the why, because Andrew, I go on about that all the time. It's like my constant thing is ask why, constantly ask why. And actually, why takes you deeper, doesn't it? That's what takes you into that deeper learning approach. But as you say, I think it's interesting, because when people first start, either a student first going on placement or someone just starting a new job, the thing they want to know about is, how do I do this? What do I do next? How do I fill that form in? What form do I have to do? And there's a lack of why. But I think over time, what we need to see is then the moving into that deeper approach. So really asking why, really digging down matters. So we've looked at approaches. We've looked at approaches that we can take to help other people learn. We've looked at the approaches we take in our own learning. What we're going to do now is move on to looking at some of the key theories that are used in learning for social work. And the first one we're going to look at is experiential learning. And experiential learning is I think, is often misunderstood. Maybe it's because people take a surface approach to what it means, and they think, oh, it just means learning through experience. Well, that's your sort of incidental learner. They're just learning through experience. It's more than that. Although it is partly about that, it goes deeper than simply we learn from experiences. I mean, you can have experiences and do the same thing over and over again, not learn from it. So, but this is taken from, is it Confucius? I never quite know how to pronounce it, but he said, apparently all those, 450 years before BC, he said, tell me and I will forget. Show me and I might remember. Involve me and I will understand. And that's really important in terms of learning, not just for our own learning, but when we're supporting service users' growth and development. So sometimes I've heard some people say, oh, I know, experiential learning, that means that's just practice makes perfect stuff, isn't it? Well, actually, practice doesn't make perfect. If you're doing it wrong, practice isn't going to make it perfect. Some people will say practice simply makes it permanent. It's not practice makes perfect, it's practice makes it permanent. But actually what I would say is practice just makes habits. all practice does is it gives you habits. And I would ask you, what are your learning habits? The team that we work with, the Student Connect team, no, they've all got very different learning habits. Some of them are very organised about their assignment writing. Some are less so. Some are a little bit more last minute. Some are a bit more pre-planned. I can see the faces being pulled here. But, you know, it is that bit about what are your learning habits? Think about your learning habits and how you're using those habits. So let's just dig a bit deeper and look at Kolb, who is said to be, you know, is seen as like the first author, if you like, the first person who wrote about experiential learning. And he created this cycle. Now, this cycle is referred to a lot in practice educator training, in supervision training. A lot of people will talk about Kolb's cycle of learning. So he starts off by saying, you have an experience. It's a theory, so he's had to use lots of made up words. You know, I have this thing about why do they just make up the words? Why don't they just talk about it as it is? So he talks about concrete experience. And then he says, after you've done this, had the experience, whatever it is. Now, it doesn't mean you've done something in a, you know, I always think of, because I'm very much a doer, I think of an experience as being doing something, but he says an experience could be reading a book. The experience could be listening into this webinar. It's the experience, but you don't learn simply from having the experience. You have to go around the cycle according to Kolb, because this is a theory. Remember, a theory is simply somebody's ideas. This is his ideas about describing how people learn. So the first thing we do is we have an experience, then we reflect on the experience through what he calls reflective observation. Now that is all about making sense. What does that mean to me? Then we go to the next stage, which he calls abstract conceptualization, concluding, learning from it. So making some sort of wider links. What can I learn from that? How does it link to other things? And then the fourth stage of active experimentation, which is like the testing out the new ideas. How am I going to try this out? How am I going to test this out? And that becomes the learning cycle. Now I'm going to return back to this in a little while, but that's your basic cycle of how adults learn. Experience, reflect on it, which is why reflection that we talk about a lot in these sessions is so important. Conclude and then plan. That's really your basic experiential learning cycle. But now we're going to look at learning styles, which is a theory in itself. Chris is going to just post a poll now. Well, we're hoping the poll is going to come up. And so you should see a poll in front of you now. And I'm asking you in this poll, have you done a learning styles questionnaire as part of your social work training? Because it's very common that perhaps a practice educator will ask a student to do a learning styles questionnaire, or sometimes some university programs get you to do a learning styles questionnaire on the day you start or something. So you should see a poll in front of you. We've had, I know not everyone can see it. It depends what platform you use, not what platform, what system, if you're watching it on a phone or something, but most people will be able to see a poll in front of them. And the question is, have you done a learning styles questionnaire as part of your social work training? You've got three options. You can answer yes, which so far 64% of people are saying yes. You can say no. We've got 31% at the moment, or you can say not sure if you can't remember. So it is, after all, a Wednesday night. So you've got yes, no, or not sure. So we're slowing down now. There we go. We had about 330 people vote. We've got 406 people with us. We had 330 votes. 63% of people have done a learning styles questionnaire of some kind. Now, it could be a whole range of different learning styles questionnaires. There could be, Honey and Mumford's is a very commonly used learning styles questionnaire, very commonly used by practice educators. You might have done a VARC questionnaire, which Nicola was referring to earlier when we were chatting before we opened up tonight. So you could have done different learning styles questionnaires, but what we've got there is 63% of people have completed a learning styles questionnaire of some kind. So I'm going to take you through now my take on what the different styles are of Honey and Mumford's Learning Styles Questionnaire. I've got to tell you, I have been loving watching Junior Bake Off every night at the moment. I love Junior Bake Off. I think it's better than the Adult Bake Off. Absolutely adore Junior Bake Off. If you've not been watching it, it's a bit of fun. So I've used a bake-off analogy because you know I like to have visual images as well. So I'm going to talk you through what each one of the learning styles is, and I'm going to show you someone baking a cake using that learning style. Now I know Chris loves baking cakes, as does Becky. I'm going to ask them later which of these cake baking styles they use, but I'm going to just try and illustrate for you activists. Now, I am an activist through and through. I know I have always been a strong activist. Now, Honey and Mumford say activists are open-minded and enthusiastic. They like new experiences. They're very keen to get involved in the here and now, and but they can be described as a bit like a bull in a china shop. Sometimes they just do it almost without thinking. They like to get stuck into things. Activists, and when I say that, I might say we, because I think I am, we get bored quickly and we want to move on to the next big thing, the next new idea. We just want to move on all of the time. So the activist cake making style is there's a bit of flour going there, there's a bit of eggs going, there's stuff going on all over the place, there's a few eggshells in the mixing bowl, and you get halfway through the recipe and realize you haven't got something that you needed that was actually essential to do it, because you've just thought, oh, I'm going to make a pancake, and just gone and got stuck in. That's an activist style to the Bake Off. So there's an activist, strong activist. Now, Honey and Mumford say we've all got a bit of each of them in us, but some of us are very much more one than the other. And if I do a learning styles questionnaire, I score about 18 on activists. It's normally scored out of 20. I score 18 on activists. I often score less than 10 on reflector, which is really bad in many ways, isn't it? And I could be, especially for someone who talks a lot about reflection, but reflectors are the kind of people, they like to stand back. A reflector likes to stand back and think things through, ponder everything that's going on. They like to think about lots of different perspectives and chew things over before reaching any conclusions. Reflectors are the kind of people, they like to sit back, they like to observe. Reflectors are brilliant because they're really good at gathering information, and the evidence they've got is often very strong because they've spent a long time thinking about it. They learn best if they're given time to think about their responses. So the reflector baking the cake is having a think about, well, do I want to do a carrot cake, or maybe I want to do a lemon cake? I don't know. I'm not sure which one I want to do, and I'll have a look at all of the recipes. One of the things about learning styles is you need to understand another person's learning style. I know I'm a strong activist. I know I'm just like, oh, let's just get it done. Let's just get it done. Whereas I know that sometimes that can be an off-putter for a reflector. I know if I'm working with a student who is a very strong reflector that I have to hold things back a little bit and allow people more time. But I'd say to you, if you're a practice educator and you're a very strong reflector and you're working with a student who's a very strong reflector, are you going to get anything done, or are you just going to talk about it? We've got to think about, we have to have a mix of different styles. It's important that we recognize all of the styles are valid, all of the styles are important, but we have different styles. Then we've got a theorist. Now, theorists are basically very logical thinkers. They like to analyze and question, and they like to learn in a very systematic, logical way. They question new learning to make sure it fits in with things, and they can have a tendency to be perfectionists, and they dislike a flippant approach. They don't like activists who are just getting on with it and just going and doing it. A theorist doesn't like a flippant approach. They like to think things through. So the theorist is going to have read all of the cookbooks. The theorist is the one that understands all that scientific, how the gluten mixes with the yeast or whatever it is, and they understand all of that. They've read all of the books. There's your theorist. Then you've got a pragmatist. Pragmatist is like the Heston Blumenthal of the bakery world. They will test a bit of everything. They'll stick something in that's going to make it blow up halfway through eating it. I know they like to test out new ideas. So They want to test ideas out and see if it works in practice. A pragmatist is the kind of person who's been to the webinar tonight, tests something out tomorrow and thinks, I'll have a go at that. But then if it doesn't work, they think, oh, it was a load of rubbish, that I'm not bothering with that again. Whereas a reflector ponders it, thinks about it before they start to use new ideas. So what we've got is just different ways of going about a task. And really all that Honey and Mumford's Learning Styles questionnaire does is give us an idea of different styles, different ways in which we go about things. So you might know, well, 60% of you have done a Learning Styles questionnaire, so you know which of those styles you are picked out as being. But what I'd say is it's really important to recognize this is not science. This is a theory. And a theory is simply somebody's ideas. So just in terms of looking at how useful is all of this sort of idea about learning styles. And I've put a bit here it's actually taken from the Share book that I know quite a lot of you have got, but a lot of the theory that surrounds learning styles has been very heavily criticised. So particularly in teaching, for example, there's some work around how this is all seen as, people talk about it as being neurobabble or neuromyths. And there's a reference to the learning styles myth and some research that was done with teachers where, and I do think this is heavily taught on practice educator training programs. So maybe we should have asked a question of those of you who are practice educators or maybe training to be practice educators now, how much focus is put on this? Because in my view, there's a bit of an over focus around learning styles on practice educator programs. They talk a lot about this almost as though it's a bit scientific, almost. And what you get told is, find out what the style is of the student and then match the learning activity to that person's style, almost as though this is something kind of scientific. And it really isn't. It is just an idea. It's just a theory, although it's a very popularized theory. And what I've written down there is that despite the distinct lack of scientific evidence to back up the claim, research identified that 93% of teachers in the UK believed that the need to link learning activities to learning styles is scientifically true. It's literally the way it's promoted. It's promoted as, this is what we should do. And I could see you nodding there, Andrew. So I don't know if you want to just say, I could see it. You were like really nodding away when I said there's a lot of emphasis in practice learning programs about this. So
yeah. I think you've pitched it really right. It's a good idea. It reminds me of Gardner's what was Gardner's theories were about and that was again discredited because he put an idea that everyone's got a skill in everything. So Alan Titchmarsh was obviously a green fingered, and I did a piece on it and I said that Wayne Rooney is a genius and in the skills of football, yes, and but then the argument was, well, he's not a very good at thinking, but he's not a politician, and equally you wouldn't ask Barack Obama to play football, or maybe Barack Obama probably is very good at that as well. But yeah, I think it's just a really good idea that just got overused, and I think in business there's actually people who make money on this, and I think that's where and I've seen some in the chat there that people are saying it's over, and this is a money business. That's why the debunking is kind of very much at the bottom of your search engine whenever you Google stuff like this.
That's really interesting point, actually, because it's all about money. And it was the learning styles questionnaires, people have to pay a lot of money to be allowed to use learning styles questionnaires and so on, so there is a lot of money in it. But just going back to your thing there about like Wayne Rooney being a genius but you wouldn't want him as a politician, although I've got to say Marcus Rashford should be the next Prime Minister. That's all I'm going to say about that one. So anyway, we'll go on to linking back, although I'm saying let's not just take learning styles as though this is scientific. And I think this is the case with all theory. One of the things I keep on talking about whenever we do a theory session in our webinars is recognize that theory is simply somebody's ideas, and that somebody may have some really good evidence behind it, or there may be very little evidence behind it. So always take a questioning approach. But what I'm going to do is link the learning styles back to Kolb and his learning cycle, because one of the things I think can be really helpful about theory is when we can start to connect the theory together and bring the puzzle pieces together, if you like. So if we're talking about Kolb's learning cycle is have an experience, reflect on it, conceptualize it, and then experiment with new ideas. If you look at that and think about learning styles, I've redrawn it, look. In the concrete experience, that's where activists are in their comfort zone. I love doing stuff. I'm really comfortable there in that doing stuff. What I'm not so good at is the reflective observation stage, because that's the stage where reflectors are very comfortable. That's their comfort zone. Abstract conceptualization is where theorists are particularly comfortable, because it's all that logical thinking, it's all that putting things together. And pragmatists who like to test out new ideas, their comfort zone is in the active experimentation stage. So I would actually argue it should be the opposite. Rather than saying, let's choose a learning style that meets somebody, let's choose a learning activity, sorry, that meets their learning style, I would say, no, let's go opposite. If I had someone helping me to learn, they might say, oh, Siobhan's an activist, so we'll give her stuff to do. That's how she's going to learn. But I'll do that anyway. What I really need someone to do is get me to reflect, because I'm not going to do that naturally. I need somebody to get me to do the conceptualizing, because that's not my natural comfort zone. So I think we tend to learn more when we're outside of our comfort zone. I think that's stretching, and it's called scaffolding in the theory, but stretching us outside of what we would do ordinarily. That's where the learning really takes place. So understanding your learning style might be more helpful to think about where is your comfort zone and how can you be stretched. I personally, rather than the learning styles, I like to think more about thinking styles. And we've talked about that before, whether you're a picture-based thinker or a verbal thinker, life experiences, issues of diversity, you know, educational experiences, hopes and dreams. I just think models like Prospective's Mandela model, you know, a great friend of the webinars, she's done a couple with us before. I think looking at models like that can really help us to think about learning, rather than a learning styles questionnaire that has largely been debunked. I think about it like that. So I'm hoping there's a bit of chat going on here about the things that we're talking about. I'm just going to very quickly run through andragogy, and then we're going to explore what I think are the most exciting of the adult learning theories. So andragogy is a theory developed in the 1970s, very popular again theory for practice education. But basically Malcolm Knowles said that we tend to teach adults in the same way that we've taught children, and that we shouldn't do that, because adults are different to children in what he describes as three main ways. He says that adults are different in terms of our self-concept. You know, we need to be self-directing. Children are happy to see themselves as part of, but we need to see ourselves as individuals. We need to see ourselves and be self-directing in our learning. We have experience, and that experience needs to be valued. Where someone feels de-skilled and devalued, that can impede their learning. I think this is really important for people like people who are maybe going to the course with a lot of pre-course experience. I'm thinking here particularly apprentices. Apprentices are very often have a lot of pre-course experience, and they can be de-skilled by the whole process of what are your learning needs without, and what are your learning experiences, and what can you bring. We get a lot of what do you need, but not a lot of what do you bring, and that's really important for all of us, I think, to have our experiences valued. And also in terms of time perspective, so the little thing down there shows children are generally in ordinary things, then it's seen as children like immediate gratification, and adults are seen as being able to delay gratification, you know, being able to think, well, I'll save up for that and that'll happen eventually or whatever. But in terms of learning, it's seen as it's the opposite, that children can learn something that they think they might find useful in adult life, whereas adults, when they learn something, they need to know how they're going to use it. They only want to learn something if it's relevant to them at that time, if they can see the use. So we've just got to think about, don't teach adults as though they were children, is basically the message of Malcolm Knowles, and thinking about that is important. So as practice educators, that could be a useful one for you to think about. Now, my favourite theory, and I think we're going to talk a bit with Andrew about how newly qualified workers can use this one really effectively, is the ladder of learning. I've done a video on this on my YouTube channel. People find it really useful to think about how we learn, how we go through a process of learning. So I'm going to talk you through this, and I want you to think about where you are in terms of learning that you're doing at the moment. So I'm going to apply this to learning to drive, because that's something that most of us can identify with as an adult. So let's take a look. This is seen as a ladder. We start at the bottom rung of the ladder. Now, the idea is that before you learn something, you're at a phase that's called unconscious incompetence. In a way, it's like blissful ignorance. You don't know what you don't know. You've been being ferried around in a car for years. You think it's going to be dead easy to drive a car. The first time you get behind the wheel, you go straight to the next ladder, next rung of the ladder. You become conscious of your incompetence. You sit there and think, I don't know how I'm ever going to steer the wheel, change the gear and indicate all at the same time. I can't do it. I can't do it. And that is actually the dangerous phase, because we are socialized to believe there's no such word as can't. So when we realize we can't do something, it can be really dangerous. People at that point either do fight or flight. Sometimes people find it so difficult to think, I can't do it. They give up on it. They concede the learning. And it's really important that we don't do that, because actually it's just a phase of learning. So what we need to do is stay and fight, keep going, keep trying to learn, and then you'll get to the next rung of the ladder, conscious competence. Now that's when, think about learning to drive. Do you remember when you first learned to drive, you had to have your hands at 10 to 2 on the wheel, and you'd do mirror, signal, maneuver, exactly the way you'd been taught how to do it. I still live in the same house now that I lived in when I passed my test. And I can remember spending hours thinking about driving round a particular area so that I didn't have to turn right onto the main road, because I didn't want to do it. It was too scary. And then once you've been driving for a while, you get to that final stage of unconscious competence. It's almost like autopilot. You can do it without thinking about it. You just get in the car and you drive. It's that bit. You don't have to do mirror, signal, maneuver anymore. You can just do it. But this is where the danger is to me, because this is presented as a ladder, and you get to the top of the ladder, it's all marvelous. But if you're unconscious, how do you know you're still competent? For me, this is where the snake comes into the ladder, because if you're unconscious, maybe you're now incompetent. I know if I had a driving examiner sitting in my car and I wasn't thinking about it, I would probably fail the test, because you slip into bad habits. You do things that perhaps you shouldn't really do because you just do it automatically. How many of you, if you drive the same journey every day, how many of you have experienced that thing where you go under the bridge and you think, oh, I don't remember going over the roundabout and through the tunnel, because you've done it on autopilot without thinking? So it's not safe. The only safe zone of this ladder is conscious competence, when you know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And that's why we have CPD. That's why we have to keep ourselves fresh. It's all of that. I think this ladder is a really good way of understanding processes of learning. I also think it's a really good way of understanding why sometimes when we're working with service users to create change, why they might concede the learning. They don't want to say to you, I can't do this, because it's actually quite painful to say, I can't do this, because we are socialized into there's no such word as can't. So this is a really helpful ladder, I think. And very often I know newly qualified workers find this particularly helpful. And I would say in supervision, this can be really helpful. Don't forget, this isn't just happening once. You're learning as a student or as a new worker, you're learning 100 things a day. You're learning all these new things at the same time. And sometimes at some points, you feel like you're conscious of your incompetence in so many areas. Now, I'm not suggesting that I would sit with a student and ever say, now look, don't worry. It's just that you're incompetent and you've just realised you're incompetent, because I don't think that's going to help very much. And actually, I don't think the word incompetence is very helpful, because it doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means you think you can't do it, and that's different. That's imposter syndrome. That's all of the other stuff that goes with it. So this is a really helpful ladder to think about where you are, but to recognize that there's always the next rung of the ladder to go on to. So Andrew, I know a lot of the newly qualified workers that do portfolios that come through you talk about this, don't they? Because I do workshops with those newly qualified workers, and they often talk about this, don't they, I think?
Yeah, I would say this is the most quoted kind of element in the assessed and supported year kind of portfolio, and I think because it often lends itself. There's often in the Warwickshire model they have to write 4 reflective pieces as they're going through, and yeah, they absolutely start off. And if anyone's got any better terms for unconscious incompetence, please put it in the chat, because I would much prefer. I share your kind of horror at describing somebody that way when it's meant to come from a nice place, but it still doesn't feel nice as it comes out of your mouth. But yeah, but equally, I think, and that's quite a nice place for them to be when they're unconsciously incompetent, because you don't know what you don't know and everything's fine. And often when we get to the 3-month stage and they're writing their kind of reflection then, and that's when they're really uncomfortable stage, because they're consciously incompetent. They know they become starkly aware of the things that they need to learn, and it is a really uncomfortable stage. And yeah, you know, as it happens, what they do is they do progress to conscious competence. Yeah, and I think I like what you do with the ladder and the snake there, because unconscious competence, and I'm going to again betray my my weekend hobby of being a sports coach. You know, unconscious competence is for kind of athletes like Vivian Miedema, the footballer, who doesn't need to think about what she's going to do. She gets the ball and without thinking about it. Whereas in social work, I think that's a very different and probably dangerous element to be doing for too many things. Unconsciously competent. I think often, maybe with some of our really basic skills, you think, Siobhan, with our relationship building and our communication, those, you know, there may be a lot of unconscious competence as we get into a flow of a conversation. But even then, I'm thinking we probably kind of have had a thought about that, or it's built up over time about things that we're comfortable with saying. But yeah, if there's anything in the chat to reframe that, at least that first one of, you know, unconscious incompetence, it's an uncomfortable phrase to be using.
Yeah, and even how you can replace it with blissful ignorance, even that just doesn't sound very nice at all, does it? So yeah, I think you're right. But as you say, I think though, Andrew, even with something like basic relationship building skills or something, even though you might think, well, you do that on autopilot, you can do that unconsciously competent, but then the pandemic comes along and changes the way in which we work, and we've got to do it differently. And I think we all slipped down into feeling consciously incompetent when this started. How do I use Zoom? How do I do this? How do I do that? So I think we've all been through all of these stages, even if we think we can do it without thinking. And that maybe takes us into situated learning theory. Now, this is a theory which is all about where we learn. And I thought I'll put this one in because I know we have quite a few people joining us who are doing the apprenticeship, and cognitive apprenticeship is a phrase that's used within this theory. So I thought it might be interesting for us to think about it. But basically, situated learning theory says that we learn to do something in the situation it normally takes place. So situated learning theory would say, look, you really learn to be a social worker when you're on placement or when you're in the job. That's when you really learn it. You learn the knowledge that you need in university, but you learn to be a social worker when you're there in the situation it takes place. And it's based around loads of research. It's a very research rich theory, this one, although it didn't research social work, but it researched lots of different professions and looked at how people learn. And it comes up with some fancy words, all theories do. It talks about legitimate peripheral participation, which basically means that when we join a new team, we kind of stand around the edges and we watch what's going on and we learn from that, and then we move towards the center of the team as we become more fully involved. Really, that's what it's about. But I've been reflecting a lot on this during the pandemic. And as a team, we, at the weekend, when I put the slides together for a Wednesday night, I always like put in the WhatsApp group what we're doing. And people, all the team members sent me a photo this weekend of their working space. Where are you actually doing your job at the moment? And you might want to guess whose is whose. I don't know if you're having a look at the pictures on there. And look, some of them have done some handy product placement, I noticed, when they sent the pictures back as well. But if you take a look there, that's our working spaces. That's where we're working. We're working on our own. That's not where you would have said 12 months ago, if we'd have said, where does social work take place? The photographs there are not the photographs you would have picked out as this is where social work is taking place. But right now, in a global pandemic, this is where social work is taking place. And even if you do go into the office, here's a picture that we showed a couple of weeks ago. Even if you do go into the office, that's what you see, an empty office space. So as a practice educator working with students who were doing placements based at home, I was really worried about this, because situated learning theory to me has always been one of the theories I've really liked, and it's felt comfortable for me. You know, theories are which ones do you find useful and interesting, and this for me was always one of those. And I was thinking, but what am I going to do working with students in this different way? How can they learn when they're not in an office surrounded by people, so they can just learn from what's going on around them? All of that theory that we've talked about. So I revisited it just to take another look at situated learning theory. And what I found was that in recent years, it's been renamed. It's been called socially situated learning theory. And it suggests that it's not so much about where the learning takes place, but it's about who the learning takes place with. It's about the relationships between people. So as practice educators, what we should be doing is helping people to connect their prior knowledge, helping people to connect relationships, searching out real life learning opportunities, even that can be done in this new situated way. So it's relationships that matter, and it's learning from one another. So I'm going to share with you now a piece of group work that was taken from working with a group of newly qualified social workers. Actually, some of the workshops that I've done with Andrew over the years, it's taken from, and I think there's somebody here. I think the person who's in Australia did those workshops with me. So if he's still awake at this time of night, I think the person who's come from Australia actually attended those workshops when he was in the UK. And he may remember this exercise for himself, so he might put that into the chat now, I don't know. But this is my favourite bit of group work ever. It must be about 15 years old, this particular flip chart. But very often when I'm going to places, people will say, can you bring that flip chart? Because they love this. And this is what a group of newly qualified social workers thought a social work team was like. I'm going to talk you through a social work team and the relationships within a social work team. I want you to look at this flip chart and identify which one of these are you. So this is the social work zoo. Up in the left-hand corner there, look, we've got the Jurassic Reptile Centre. That's where you've got the dinosaurs. Now, they describe the dinosaurs as they've been around for years and years and years. They don't like change. They've just been here forever and they don't like any change going on. Every team pretty much got a dinosaur. There's also a chameleon. Now, the chameleon on the social work team is the person who is changeable. They say one thing to one person, another thing to another person. Underneath there, there's the elephant. The elephant is strong, persistent, resilient. They never forget anything. They said as newly qualified social workers, they really liked the idea that you could learn from, you could hold on to the tail of the elephant and feel like you could really learn from them. And then as you come down, you'll see the aquatic centre. And unfortunately, I would like to think this doesn't exist on social work teams, but everywhere I show this, people will say, oh no, there is a shark on the team. And there's the shark there. The shark is the person who will eat, you know, stab you in the back, eat you alive. It's the person who's not helpful to you at all. Then you've got the penguin. Now, the penguin is everybody wants to be like a penguin. Everybody wants to walk like the penguin. The penguin is the person who is strong, dependable, protective, very focused on the families, focused on service users, and really smart. And everybody wants to be like the penguin. Now, up the top in the other corner, you've got the hibernation zone, and there's a bit of a space there. And the space is because this group was saying, look, we've been on the team 6 months. There are people we've never met, we've never seen. They're the people who are on sick leave or maternity leave or whatever. They're the hibernators. Then we've got the squirrel. The squirrel is someone who is really good with, they've got loads of knowledge, loads of information. But the problem with the squirrel, and they're really good problem solvers as well, but the problem with the squirrel, this group said, is they hide all their nuts up a tree. They don't share them with anybody else. If you ask them a question, you got to ask them the question in exactly the right way at exactly the right time, and they might throw a nut at you, but basically they keep everything to themselves. They hide it all away. So their problem solving skills are not shared with other people. As you come down, you'll see there's a monkey. Everybody knows the monkey on the social work team, that person who is there to bring a little humour into the team. There's also the bee. The bee is the busy, hardworking team player. They said the bee is really good at cross-pollinating, bringing ideas from other places, one to another. But they said also the bee is a bit irritating because they buzz around telling you how busy they are, and they're just, you know, they're just a bit irritating with that. Then you go to the petting area, there's the sheep. The sheep is the follower. The sheep has no idea why they're doing what they're doing. They're just doing it because everyone else on the team is doing it. So they just follow along behind. There's the ostrich. The ostrich has got their head buried in the sand. They have no idea what's happening around them. They've just got on with their own job and no idea what's going on in the rest of the team. There's also a chicken. Thankfully, they didn't draw the chicken because the chicken is headless. The chicken is just running around in a state of crisis all of the time, complete headless chicken. And there's a bulldog. The bulldog is someone who's got a good idea, but only one idea. It's like a bone. They're like a dog with a bone. They never let go of it. The last few people or characters I'm going to tell you about on a social work team are the peacock. The peacock is someone who looks good. They've got this tail they put up, but when they put the tail down, there's no substance to them. They can just tell a good story. They don't actually do a lot behind it. There's an owl. They said as a newly qualified worker, you want your owl to be your supervisor because they're someone who's wise and knowledgeable and they can get you to see things from different perspectives. And then there's the zookeeper. They said the zookeeper, maybe the zookeeper, they said, is the team manager who goes around just shoveling up all the poo and cleaning up behind everybody. Or maybe the zookeeper is the feeder of the team, you know, the person who comes in with all the biscuits and the chocolates and feeds everybody up because they said we've only been here 6 months and we've already put half a stone on. This is in the days when we used to go into offices. And then finally, they produce themselves as a caterpillar who through the process of transformative learning, so we could look at other theories around transformative learning and striving to improve their practice, turns into a butterfly, which sounds really lovely and cheesy. But then they also said, but then, you know, if we don't like the team we're on, we can just fly on off somewhere else. Now, that's, I think, one of the best ways I've seen of depicting a social work team. As a social work student connecting, when we've discussed it, we think we need to update it. We need to add some other animals. So if you can think of another animal that there is on the social work team, stick it in the chat, put it in there. I've thought about meerkats who get together in like little cliques and watch out for each other. I think there's often meerkats going on, isn't there, within a social work team? But there's others. I don't know, Ngozi might want to tell you what kind of animal we were thinking Ngozi might be, or different people in the chat suggest the animals of social work. But what I think this really does is it shows the importance of relationships and how we learn through our social work careers from the people that surround us, from the relationships on our team. And it's relationship-based learning that really matters, learning from one another that really matters. So we're going to work towards a conclusion. Andrew is going to share with you his own theory that he's developed over a range of years of experience of working with newly qualified social workers. But just before that, I'm just going to share with you this idea, which is developed on from Miller's Pyramid of Clinical Competence, which is something that they use in looking at doctors, particularly looking at GPs and how GPs become GPs. But what you've got here is the background there is knowledge, skills and values. That's not what it says in Miller's Competence. I've added that in. But as social workers, we over time need to develop our knowledge. We need to develop our skills, and our values should always be there. Clear values. But we start off, what we learn at university, we start off with, we're taught something, so we know it. We know, I don't know, we know the Mental Capacity Act and the principles of the Mental Capacity Act, but it's not until we go out there that we understand how that actually works in practice. So we start with knowing, then we build on that with understanding, and we build on that with showing other people that we can do it. Then we do it. But then the key thing is we go beyond doing social work to we become a social worker. So we go beyond does to is. I am a social worker, not I do social work, I am a social worker. And I think that pyramid kind of illustrates our growth and our progress through our social work career. But then Andrew's got this brilliant way of looking at how we progress and a little story about his own early career. So I'm going to hand it over to you for this sort of final slide and final theory idea, Andrew.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, I guess we start at the beginning with what should I do, and in this situation, this is where I often imagine a newly qualified social worker probably when they go to the manager for some advice or to discuss a case, it's such a new situation that they generally don't have an idea, and they come out with straight with what should I do, and that's the question that they can ask, and the manager will respond appropriately. Now, as they develop and they get a little bit better, and confidence is there, they can come in with to that conversation with their manager, and if they're saying, should I do, should I, is this the situation, should I be doing this, should I be doing that? And where I started to develop this kind of this theory was early in my career, as I was saying, Siobhan. I had a bit of a dip in my confidence, and so I was approaching my manager, and I'll have to give Rob Clifton, my old manager, a certain amount of credit, because he was one who kind of led me through this. I don't think he was conscious of it. I actually spoke to him the other day and he'd forgotten all about it. So that's it. You can't have any credit, actually. So, but yeah, they were saying, as the person's confidence is increasing, they will tentatively say, should I do this? And yeah, this was the process I was going through, and Rob was saying he could see that I did know a lot more than I was perhaps giving myself credit for, and he basically said, turn that statement into take that question mark into a statement. So so the next step of confidence is, this is what I'm going to do. So really, from the should I do to the I will do, there's not a lot of difference in my knowledge, but it's the confidence that are coming. So that the question mark, and because it's still it takes away, you need to have that validation, and then I continued with that, and I was very much kind of clinging onto his trouser tails, as I wanted to, I didn't want to let go of that kind of security blanket of my manager. But then what I came to is that he'd obviously gotten a little tired of me as well, constantly asking him the questions that he knew I knew, and I knew the answers to. And I don't know how he managed to figure this out. Maybe I was the only one who made routine visits to his office. Being the only male, I was probably had the largest stride and was probably the heaviest on the team. But so he might have recognized my footsteps coming up the corridor to his office. But basically, he just called out. He said, "Andrew, go away. I agree with anything that you're going to suggest." And at that point, I turned around and I never went back with any, not inappropriate, but anything when I knew I did know the answer. you know, not to go and consult to him. And I needed it, and it sounded perhaps harsher than it was, because I needed it. I was ready for that, and he just needed to. I kind of, you know, it's like a bit like a bird pushing the I can't remember what the right word is for when they push the baby out, because they know it can fly. So that's basically what he was doing. But yeah, the theory goes there. So it's the same scenarios there. But you initially start with what should I do, because you genuinely don't know. As you get to know, build up your knowledge, it's should I do. Then again, with the next confidence step, it says I will do this. I will do this, but you're still checking it out with your manager. This is beforehand. And then obviously the final one is after the situation. This is what I did, Gaffer. You know, and it's just in that sense, I mean, you should always be telling your manager if you made any kind of fairly big decisions or major decisions, just for the kind of the process that they're aware of it. But yeah, those are the kind of the 4 stages. You could link them to the previous one or into the ladder of learning. I think it's a similar kind of process that you go through, and I think you could probably all recognise that. And if any of you maybe at one of the stages, and maybe you should consider if you're ready for the next stage. But it's fine. You know, again, I think it's really important to always be comfortable and recognise we're at the stage we're at. And often you do know, but you know, I think when my confidence was a little bit low in these areas, and it was just him sort of. I think remember what I said. He says, you know, change that question mark to a statement, you know, to a full stop or a you know, and that would help me move on.
Mm. I think it's really clever, just the wording of it. You know, what should I do? Should I do? I will do. I have done. I think it really shows that growth in progress. I think it's a really good way of just looking at it. And I liked what you said there, Andrew, about if you identify which stage you're at, you can identify how to get to the next stage. And that's really important. And actually a growth in confidence demonstrates all of that. So thank you for sharing that with us tonight. So in terms of drawing tonight's session to a conclusion and a kind of summary of what we've been looking at, then I'm going to just talk about, I think leadership is really important in learning, and I think Andrew's just demonstrated that, actually, how a manager or a mentor or just a critical friend who might be an elephant or a penguin on the team can really support you in terms of your learning. So leadership matters. The environment that you're in also matters. And I don't necessarily mean that just as a behaviourist approach, but just the environment can matter in terms of, you know, where we're all working from, the photographs we shared with you earlier. An anti-oppressive approach is perhaps one of the most important aspects of learning and facilitating somebody's learning, is taking an approach which is anti-oppressive and should underpin everything that we do as social workers. Think about relationships, the importance of relationships as part of learning. It's perhaps the most important aspect of the environment, really, is the relationships that you have within that environment. Think about your learning needs. What do you need to learn? But also, what are your preferences for learning? What's your style of learning? Think about that more widely. Think about your identity, who you are, how you bring your identity, how your identity and who you are is validated within the learning process. We need to think about new ideas. Whenever we take on something new, whenever we take on new learning, it kind of stretches us, and that stretching is really growth. It's all fabulous. It's all about how we learn. And that's what leads into growth. And there we go. We've spelled out the word learning. It's summarized a lot of the learning theory that we've looked at tonight, but with leadership, environment, anti-oppressive practice, relationships, needs, identity, new ideas, all of that leads into growth. And that's really what learning is about. I hope that we've helped you to see tonight your own learning. But we've only got a couple of minutes left, but I'm just going to ask Nicola if she just wants to say something quickly now about how learning. I know Nicola, as you'll know when she introduced herself, has been involved in learning and learning education for a long time. But Nicola, you were telling us earlier about how learning has really helped in a piece of work that you've been doing, weren't you?
Yes. Yeah, it has. And so I was working with a young mum who is in care proceedings, and they wanted me to deliver a piece of work with her over 6 weeks about healthy relationships and budgeting. And it became very apparent that when I first met her, I was like, you know, what do you know about yourself? Sort of trying to get to know her. And she just kept saying, I don't know. I don't know. And suddenly I thought, well, she can't learn anything until she needs to know. And actually part of her parenting assessment, it came out, you know, that she had cognitive difficulties. And so I just thought, this seems to be a barrier that everyone keeps telling me about, yet we weren't looking at how she learns in order for her to retain the information or to really participate and engage in the piece of work. And so she turned out to be visual. And so in the conversations, I'd be like, you know, take your time and visualize what I've said to you, or what do you think, you know, ask people questions, use lists. And you know, if she wanted to save, and I said to her, well, visualize what that would look like. And she got a pot and started saving. And by the 5th week, she had £60. And when she was able to recall these things, because I really focused on her learning style. And in the 6 weeks when she spoke to my PE as part of the direct observation, she said, you know, this really works. I feel more confident. I know about myself. I feel like I can pause, ask people to stop, because I need to think about what they're talking about, but I need to visualize it. And just even the language she was using had really pushed her on. And I just think we think of learning and we think it stops when we leave placement or when we leave education, but in actual fact, every day we are learning, and so are our service users. And sometimes you meet service users who genuinely don't know. And so understanding their learning style means that you might connect with them on a whole nother level that nobody else has. And that's what she said at the end.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that, Nicola, because I think that's really vital for us recognising why understanding learning isn't just about ourselves, isn't just about what we do whilst we're a student. It's about everything that we do as social workers. And especially if we want to work towards taking an approach which is more based around social pedagogy, which we'll look at in a future session, because I think the learning elements of, and the things that you've just talked about, particularly Nicola, are really important. So thanks for sharing that. So over the next few weeks, we've got some fabulous webinars coming up. If tonight's your first one, or if tonight's the first time you've been for a while, you may not know what we've got coming up. On the screen in front of you now, you've got the webinars coming up for the next few weeks. And I think the team will be putting the links into the chat now. I can see lots of cameras have been switched off, so it means people are busy loading stuff in there. I think I can see it looks now like some of the links are going into the chat. So if you want to register and join us next week, we've got another panel webinar where we'll be looking at celebrating LGBTQ+ History Month, which is February. And the following week, we'll be looking at the ethics of exploring the Facebook and social media of the service users that we support. So we've got some fabulous sessions coming up that you can register for. Thank you for joining us. Thank you again to Andrew, our special guest tonight. And thank you to everybody for joining us tonight. I think we're over with time now, aren't we? So are we going to